I want to thank Teresa for the honor and privilege of being here. I do want to correct Teresa on one thing. It's not my story, it's our story. My lovely wife, Michelle, is in the back, and she is my partner through all the story that you're going to hear. And my good friend Rosie Butler, who we caught up the other day on the telephone, and I was telling her a story about my son. One of my sons was born 31 years ago, and Rosie was the first one at the house with a wicker chair and a little present like that. But what I didn't say, Rosie, is tomorrow's his birthday. So that was 31 years ago. So anyway, so Rosie and I go way back. Michelle's and my story is I had a liver transplant 37 years ago. We were newly married. Michelle was 9 months pregnant with our first son, and she was teaching school. I was right out of law school. We had our whole life in front of us, and all of a sudden I start getting flu-like symptoms. I start getting jaundice. I start getting this itch that won't go away. I would cut my foot and it wouldn't stop bleeding. And so we went to the doctor, and my liver enzymes were just through the roof. And so we were hospitalized. And while we were in the hospital, the doctors told us he's either going to get better or he's going to die. And remember, this was 38 years ago. And Michelle wouldn't accept that as an answer. She says there's got to be another option. And through searching around, we find out that there's a guy up in Pittsburgh, and I'm from Birmingham. There's a guy up in Pittsburgh, and now we have great treatment in Birmingham. Let me be clear about that. But at that time, there was a guy in Pittsburgh who invented the liver transplant. He had started it in the 1960s and really didn't have success until the 1980s. And his success came about a lot because of the discovery of cyclosporin. So I had my transplant in 87, about 4 years before. He had done 50, and then he had done 100, he had done 200, and my year he did 400. So I sort of caught the wave at the right time. And when we got up there, I flew MedJet. My mind is really foggy around that time. I think the caregiver goes through more than the patient does in my mind. Michelle was looking at, I may go through life without a husband. I may have a son who doesn't have a dad, and she's trying to deal with that, 9 months pregnant, and all the doctor issues, and I'm just sort of in a fog. I do remember when I was at the hospital, we were getting pushed onto an elevator, and a nurse said, "Is God still on the throne?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, there's hope." And I've carried that with me to this day. One other memory I had is I have a farmer buddy who brought me some peaches. I don't know why I remember that part, but those are two of the few memories that I have of that time. But we flew by MedJet to Pittsburgh, and they did this workup. You had 2 weeks to go through all the testing and whatnot to see if they could find a match. And about halfway through, they said, he's only got a couple weeks to live. And if we've got a liver, and you've got X hours to decide what to do. I was perfectly healthy in March of 1987. We took a vacation down to the British Virgin Islands. I had a transplant in July, and they never figured out what it was. I left the hospital. They called it non-A, non-B hepatitis, meaning we can't figure out what it is. And I don't have a diagnosis to this day. But anyways, they claim I got a vote on whether to do the transplant or not. I don't remember that part either, but we went ahead, we did the transplant, and I was in ICU. Michelle, one other thing about the hospital, that was one of the premier places to have a liver transplant, but you did not want to have a baby in that hospital. They didn't have a maternity ward because a couple blocks away was one of the premier women's hospitals in the world, McGee Women's Hospital. So we would walk through the hallways and they would tell Michelle, "Do not have that baby, do not have that baby, do not have that baby." And she's a rule follower, so she did not have the baby. I had the transplant. When I got out of ICU and was in a private room, she came up there with me, and I had a reaction to a medicine, and I had a seizure. And Michelle goes running out looking for a nurse, and at that time, there's a priest walking off the elevator, and Michelle goes, "We don't need you, we don't need you." And anyways, that was what brought about our first son. She had Trent shortly after, I think, the trauma of that induced Trent to be born, and we had a 10-pound baby because she's a rule follower. So, but long story short, we were in Pittsburgh from July until November. You know, now they do liver transplants almost like, you know, same-day procedures. But we were up there that long because they were adjusting the medication. They had Dr. Starzl had done this combination of cyclosporin, Imuran, and prednisone, and so they would adjust it up and down. And so I understand I still live with my labs 3-4 times a year. I still get blood drawn, and I live with it's a good time or it's a bad time. And they would tell us 2 more good times and you can go home, and then no doubt, I mean, you know, the liver enzymes would be bad. To this day, I have a liver enzyme that's never been normal. But thankfully, a doctor said, look, he looks healthy, let's send him home. And so Friday the 13th of November, got to come home. That's our lucky day, Friday the 13th. We love that day. And along the way, Michelle and I have learned some lessons that I wanted to share with you. And the first thing is, it's just so important to either have a support system or to be a support system. You know, Michelle didn't take no for an answer. Our parents both moved to Pittsburgh when we had the transplant. My brother was studying in England, came back. Michelle's brother had a blood drive because this was back during the AIDS epidemic. So we had a blood drive, and we took our blood with us to Pittsburgh. And now I have a friend who's going through chemo because he's got cancer. And so we've organized a group to mow his grass and to drive him to chemo. So, you know, just be there for the person that's going through it, or, you know, have a support system. That's important. And the second thing we learned is just how wonderful medical care is. The doctors, the nurses, the coordinators, whoever it might be, they've devoted their life to making you better. And, you know, Dr. Starzl spent so many years in frustration before he perfected the liver transplant. I've had 12 coordinators who tell me, yes, you can take this medicine, don't take this medicine. I've had a surgeon who I could text right now and he would respond to me in 5 minutes. He's now in West Virginia. We have a nurse, we exchange Christmas cards. One nurse out of all the nurses we had, because she gave extra special care, I can still remember her cleaning my wound with a Q-tip, you know. And so I'm so thankful for the medical care we received over the years. Another lesson I learned is having a liver transplant at 26 is one of the greatest gifts I ever got in my life, because I take every day as a gift. Every day of health is a gift. Every day of life is a gift. I drive down 280 in the traffic, and I say, this is a gift. I have a picture of Pittsburgh on my office wall to remind me that it's a gift. I have a fever. I get a high fever. I'm glad to be around to have a high fever, because the alternative is not a good one. So every day is a gift. When I drive to work, I drive by Grandview Hospital. And I just pray for the people who are in there, because I know what they're going through. You know, the Bible tells us that we go through afflictions so that we can comfort others when they go through an affliction. And so I take that as part of my responsibility, which is another thing that we've learned is I feel like I have an obligation to give back. You know, the doctors and nurses and medical team that spent so much time helping me, I have an obligation to give back. So I try to be active in the community and coached all my boys in Little League teams, and I go visit people in prisons, and we're active in our church and things along those lines. I have an obligation for that, but I also have an obligation to the family, because somebody died so that I could live. And really that's, you know, maybe the most important thing that I've learned through this is that, you know, somebody died 37 years ago so that I could live today, but more importantly than that, somebody died 2,000 years ago so that I could live in all eternity. And so I'm just thankful for my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. As long as God's on the throne, there's hope. Thank you so much. I appreciate the invitation.